will not stand for that, and that's precisely what they said this week. The Kremlin announced, and here it's reported by RT in our next slide, that these threats against the Syrian government, like Spicer, saying we know they're going to do another chemical weapons attack, and this kind of thing. These are unacceptable. Of course, I think the Russians are a little understated in calling out these false flags, Jeremy. I mean, sure, they can say it's unacceptable, we won't let it happen. That's probably getting most of the message across. But I wish the Russians would take a much more proactive line against false flags. RT used to be full of 9/11 truth stuff. I was there, part of the program 9/11 and Operation Gladio, which was Daniel Bushel's Truth Seeker program that nearly went viral into like 100 million plus views on the run up to 9/11 a few years ago. And then the NSA apparently, or somebody with their capabilities, removed it from all search engines, including the YouTube search engine. So it's soaring towards 100 million views, suddenly stopped and flatlined. And so RT used to be doing that. And now it seems to me the Russian government, and especially RT, have really stepped back in pushing back against false flags. I wish they would be more forthright.
Yes, similarly to the way that the truth movement calling out the threats of false flag is key, no matter the intention of whether Trump himself is trying to prevent something by talking about the assertion of the truth is the key factor here. And of course, the Russian government and RT, as the RT looks more and more in the West as if it's been compromised, likely by Zionist forces from within, and the Russian government becomes looking more and more like the dog that didn't bark in relationship to this larger war of terror, and whether it's because they're Chechnya and their own so-called Muslim problem, or whether there's a larger geostrategic consensus about escalation of militarization, of security contracts. And yeah, Russia, if it were serious in standing down the U.S. and Israel, would be calling out these false flags very, very clearly in a very official fashion, rather than saying we're not going to let this happen, which is makes me suspicious whether they played an agreeing role in the softening of the Syrian government in relationship to the Ghouta false flag and facilitating the shipping off of their deterrent. Now, I'm all against the chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, and of course, this is what's missed also in this, is that no matter who does these attacks, and who, there are human beings on the ground who suffer the consequences. And the larger crime here in Syria is the destabilization effort, which is very, very clearly described in the clean break documents, and it appears to be being followed. So we need real patriots of international scope, not patriots who are willing to go along to get along in order to create their own London-backed situation in terms of the riches of paper currency and security contracts.
Well, part of the problem, Jeremy, with the Russians being so soft-spoken in the way they call this stuff out, is it was when you have two sides that are putting out messages, conflicting messages, fighting with each other, and one side is providing a very strong message, even if it's completely false, if it's a lie, and the other side is putting out a kind of a moderate message. The problem is that the audience, which isn't really paying attention, often is going to sort of split the difference and say, well, the truth must be halfway in between. This problem was pointed out in this great book, Political Ponerology, by the Polish physician Lobasuski. He wrote about his experiences in communist Poland. And he says that psychopaths get into power and create a pathocracy, or a psychopathic kind of contagion in power. And that he points out that psychopaths who lie like they breathe can put out these very strong messages that are total lies. And so if you're testifying against a psychopath in court, the psychopath will just make up this extreme lie that supports his position in court. And then when you provide a kind of a moderate, rational portrait of your own position, the judge and jury will usually split the difference. And so they end up the decision ends up massively favoring the liar and the psychopath. And that's what's happening here. The whole media, the public is imagining that this chemical weapons BS, these false flags, actually there might be some truth to them. And so that's why Russia needs to take a stronger position. They need to scream false flag just as loud as Sean Spicer and Trump and the mainstream media are screaming evil chemical weapons by the evil dictator Assad. So that's my advice to the Russian PR people, and I doubt if they're going to take it. But stop being so reasonable. Stop being so moderate. Put your position out there in a strong and clear way.
Yeah, the connections between Russia increasingly with Israel in relationship to these security contracts, the importation of millions of right-wing Russians into Israel after the fall of the Soviet Union appears to be part and parcel of some type of exchange agreement between Tel Aviv and Moscow. And whether this is playing into the sort of the soft rolling of Russia against the worst aggressions of the U.S. and Israel in this region is a question that needs to be answered.
And this relates to the story that you submitted, our next story, which was the Gordon Duff interview, a terrific interview. Kind of a small slide here, but
sorry.
That's okay. It just came out that way. Anyway, Gordon points out that we're seeing a deceptive, pullout of Daesh from Mosul and so on. That actually, the usual suspects are still running Daesh, and that he said that the U.S. sailors coming aground in Israel that's going to set up a false flag that maybe the evil anti-Israel terrorists, quote unquote, are going to be attacking the U.S. sailors in Israel. He says that they never used to let sailors go ashore in situations like this, precisely to avoid the possibility of this kind of false flag.
Yes, and the reason that I included this is because to me it seems like a very credible warning about how this all could go down. While there's a lot of emphasis on Syria and this now debunked chemical weapons attack, it remains that Hezbollah in southern Lebanon remains the main target in many ways, in terms of the most immediately geographical target of the right-wing Israeli government, in terms of their clean break program. And so in thinking through this connection from Iran very geographically through Syria into Lebanon and the relationship with Hezbollah, a really powerful way to set things off would be to have some type of attack on U.S. sailors in Israel that's blamed on Iranian-backed Hezbollah operatives, which would then initiate an Israeli assault on southern Lebanon and maybe a further assault on Syria.
And this reminds us of what happened, or what didn't quite happen, back in 2007. As our next slide shows, there was a parallel situation in Bahrain. In that case, Gwyneth Todd, a former member of the National Security Council, who was a top advisor to a series of admirals in Bahrain, where the U.S. Fifth Fleet is headquartered, became aware of a plan for a big false flag to attack American sailors and kill American sailors, and then blame it on Iran-sponsored forces. In this case, it would have been Bahraini Shia forces. And Gwyneth knew this was ludicrous, that the whole setup was ridiculous. And to her credit, she had the courage to blow the whistle on it and stop it from happening. She went through her State Department contacts, and they were able to prevent this false flag from happening. However, she then ended up with an order, a price on her head, an execution order. She had to flee Bahrain, and she's been living in the boondocks of Australia and being threatened by American dark operators ever since. So same thing's happening now in Israel. It looks like a setup of Hezbollah attacking U.S. sailors, just as back in 2007 we nearly had supposedly Iranian-sponsored Bahraini Shia forces attacking American sailors. In both cases, the purpose was exactly the same: start a big U.S. war with Iran, or some kind of war with Iran and with Iranian-sponsored forces on behalf of Israel.
Yes, this speaks to the importance of patriotic insiders involved in national security, whether they're in the military, intelligence, or civilian command structure, who take their oath to protect the Constitution based on our God-given rights, rather than the geopolitical cause of the worst elements of the United States, and now increasingly more a hostile foreign government out of Tel Aviv that is utilizing our military to take down what's really their political enemies. And Richard Clarke being fingered by Gwyneth Todd is really interesting, and the 9/11 Truth Movement should look at that with a lot of interest. And also, Seymour Hersh was part of doing the coverage about the escalation of threats of provocative actions in relationship to Iran in that era of 2006, 2007. He said that there were plans on the table that were ultimately rejected to do false flags and blame them on Iran, I believe, and even Iraq at the time. And so this needs to be exposed from the inside out, and it needs to be bound. And then ultimately, we're going to need to wrap and roll this entire post 9/11 shakedown era up, whether it's the security contractors, the Israeli political motivations, the domestic fascist security forces. This needs to be rolled up based on Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution, so we don't have to continually put out fire after fire here.
Here. And maybe we'll talk about how that could be done. There's a Cynthia McKinney and Robert David Steele initiative that we'll get to later that I think is one of the many promising efforts here on rolling that stuff up.